The car pulled up to the Kong estate just as the evening light faded, and Ayanna Davies stepped out alone. Minsuk had called 40 minutes earlier, board emergency. He'd be late. Just go in, he told her. I'll be there soon. What he forgot to mention was that almost no one inside that mansion knew she existed. Ayanna walked in calmly. She had barely taken a seat when the cousin's eyes landed on her. Slow scan. Head to toe. Move away from that seat. You're blocking the guest area. You can go to the staff area. Ayanna looked up. You saw me sitting down and assumed I was a staff. What exactly told you that? The cousin laughed shortly. Don't make this awkward. Just move. You made it awkward when you opened your mouth. An aunt stepped forward. You people always act bold before, which people? Ayanna cut in immediately. The aunt stopped. Finish it, Ayanna said. You were so confident when you started. Nothing came out. I thought as much. The grandmother walked in. She took one look at the frozen expressions, the stiff postures, Ayanna sitting unmoved at the table, and her eyes narrowed. What is going on here? She looked at Ayanna directly. Who are you? A guest, Ayanna said simply. The grandmother almost smiled. Not warmly. A guest. She looked at the cousin. Is she staff? Has to be, or she is the help, I guess, the cousin said, recovering slightly. Ayanna smiled. Remove her from this table. The grandmother turned to the staff. A nervous employee approached. Ayanna looked at the grandmother directly. You've been here 2 minutes. You don't know my name. You didn't ask why I'm here. You just pointed. The grandmother's eyes went cold. How dare, the front doors opened. Minsuk stepped in, read the tension instantly and frowned. What happened? Nobody answered. He looked at Ayanna standing at the table, walked straight to her, took her hand, and faced the room. This is Ayanna Davies. My wife. The cousin's wine glass slipped. Red wine spread across the cream carpet. Ayanna watched it, then looked up. You should get someone to clean that. A pause. Oh wait. That's what you thought I was here for. The room had nothing left. But this is only the beginning. If you want more stories where the one they underestimated turns out to be the most dangerous person in the room, subscribe. Because in the Kang estate, they didn't just insult the wrong woman. They exposed themselves to her story. The grandmother sat across from Minsuk at the dinner table 40 minutes later with the controlled fury of a woman who had been betrayed by someone she trusted completely and was not yet ready to show how deeply it cut. Explain this to me, she said. Her voice was even. That was the most dangerous version of her voice. We've been married for 7 months, Minsuk said. Legally. Fully. The marriage is real. 7 months. She repeated the number the way people repeat things they are trying to make themselves believe. You have been married to this woman for 7 months, and you told no one in this family. Jia knew. Every head at the table turned toward the staircase instinctively, as if summoned, and then Jia appeared at the bottom of it, 23 years old, bright-eyed. Already moving toward Ayanna with an energy that made it obvious she had been listening from the top of the stairs for the last several minutes. She crossed the room and wrapped her arms around Ayanna with the easy warmth of someone embracing a person they already loved. You're finally here, Jia said into Ayanna's shoulder. Ayanna hugged her back. Your timing is terrible, she murmured. I was listening, Jia whispered. You were incredible. The family watched this reunion and understood several things at once. This was not new. This was not a stranger being welcomed into a space. Jia already knew this woman, already loved this woman, had apparently kept this secret for months with the cheerful confidence of someone who found the whole thing slightly entertaining. The marriage was not impulsive. It was not a mistake made in a moment of weakness. It had been a decision, protected carefully, revealed on Minsuk's terms. The cousin sat with an expression caught between embarrassment and resentment, unable to decide which emotion served her better. The aunt with the jade jewelry had not spoken since Minsuk walked in. When the cousin finally offered something resembling an apology, leaning toward Ayanna with her chin slightly lifted as though the act of apologizing was itself a concession she was making under protest, Ayanna looked at her and said, Don't apologize to me, please. I don't need your apology. Suddenly you apologize to me 'cause he's here. No, thank you. The cousin's mouth closed. Minsuk, seated beside Ayanna, said nothing. But the corner of his mouth moved slightly. Dinner was tense and formal, and beneath the formality was a current of disruption that everyone could feel and nobody wanted to name directly. Minsuk stayed beside Ayana through all of it. He refilled her water. He handed her things before she asked for them. He answered questions about the business with the same composure he always had, but his attention kept returning to her, small consistent movements that the family noticed and catalogued and didn't know what to do with. They had never seen him like this. Minsuk was not a cold man, but he was a contained one. Reserved. Capable of warmth, but sparing with it, careful with it, the way people become careful with things that have been hurt before. And here he was sitting beside this woman who had walked into his family's estate alone and faced down his grandmother without blinking, and something in him was softer. Not weak. Just open in a way that none of them had seen before. The grandmother ate without speaking for a long time. She was thinking. The family knew that silence. It meant she was not finished. 2 years earlier, it had been raining the way it only rains in late autumn, not dramatic, not storming, just a relentless gray weight that made everything feel heavier than it was. Ayana had just finished a 14-hour surgical shift. She was still in her scrubs under her coat, her shoes slightly damp from a puddle she'd stepped in near the parking structure. And she was thinking about whether she had anything at home worth eating or whether she was facing another night of crackers and whatever fruit hadn't gone soft yet. She was 29 years old. She had been a surgical nurse for 4 years. She was very good at her job and quietly exhausted by a world that didn't seem to know what to do with women who were very good at things. She was crossing the intersection near the hospital when she heard the sound. Not a crash. Something before a crash. Tires finding grip too late, a horn, the particular thud of a car mounting a curb and stopping just short of a streetlight. She turned toward it automatically, for years of surgical nursing had rewired her instincts entirely, and now her first response to anything alarming was toward it, not away. The car had stopped half on the curb. The engine was running. The driver's door opened slowly and a man stepped out, and the first thing she noticed was not that he was handsome. The first thing she noticed was that he was moving like someone operating on the last reserves of everything they had, upright, but only barely, functional, but only technically. She walked over to him. "Are you hurt?" He looked at her. "Focus slowly." "No." "Are you sure?" "Because you just mounted a curb." "I know." He seemed genuinely embarrassed by this. "I'm fine." "You don't look fine," Ayana said. She was not being unkind. She was being accurate. "You look like someone running from himself." He went still. She didn't know why she'd said it exactly like that. It had just come out. She waited for him to be offended. People with money and power were usually offended when someone was direct with them without permission. He wasn't offended. He looked at her for a long moment in the rain, and something in his face did the thing that faces do when a person hears something true they weren't ready for. A small loosening. A shift behind the eyes. "I'm Choi Minsuk," he said. "Ayana Davies," she said. "Are you going to be able to drive?" "I don't think so." "Then you should call someone." She helped him call his driver, waited until the car arrived, and then she walked home through the rain thinking about crackers and soft fruit and whether she'd left her phone charger at work. She did not think about him again until 3 days later when she was on shift and he appeared in the hospital lobby asking for her by name. He had found out where she worked. He was not, it turned out, the kind of man who let things go. What followed was not a sweep of grand gestures or cinematic moments. It was slower than that and more real. He came back to the hospital twice before she agreed to have coffee with him. Coffee became dinner. Dinner became long walks in neighborhoods where nobody recognized him. She asked him about his brother. She had read about the death in passing, a news item she hadn't paid much attention to at the time, and instead of deflecting, he told her the truth. The grief. The weight of the inheritance. The way he had woken up one morning and realized he hadn't actually breathed properly in 6 months. She told him about her brother too. About the funeral she had attended at 22, the grief she had decided to convert into purpose, the reason she had chosen medicine over the comfortable life her parents had built. He listened the way very few people listened, without waiting for his turn. They did not rush anything. They argued about things. She told him when she thought he was wrong, and he surprised her by taking it seriously. He told her things he had apparently never told anyone, and she kept them carefully. 6 months in, He told her he loved her in a way that had no performance in it at all, just the direct statement of a fact he had finished resisting. She believed him. Not because she was naive. Because she had spent 4 years watching people in the most vulnerable moments of their lives, and she knew what a person looked like when they were telling the truth with their whole self. They married quietly overseas, with Gia and 2 of Ayana's closest friends as witnesses. No press. No family announcement. Minsuk had explained the situation, the shareholders, the arranged marriage his grandmother was already engineering, the way the Kang family machine would respond to something they couldn't control. He was not hiding her. He was protecting her while he built the circumstances that would make the reveal on their terms. He had not counted on the family dinner happening early. The family went to work the way powerful families always go to work when they feel a boundary has been crossed. The passive aggression started within days. An aunt arrived for a visit and managed within 4 minutes to suggest that Ayana must have found the estate's grandeur overwhelming after growing up without it. Another cousin referenced, very casually, a tabloid piece that had appeared online speculating about Minsuk's secret marriage and whether the woman involved had targeted him deliberately. A family friend made a comment at a gathering about Minsuk's work ethic and how it was important that the people around him understand the sacrifices required, and looked at Ayana while she said it. Ayana moved through all of it the way she moved through difficult shifts, present, attentive, absolutely unwilling to shrink. When the aunt made the comment about grandeur, Ayana smiled and said, "That's kind. I actually grew up in a house larger than this one. But I find smaller spaces easier to keep honest." The aunt blinked. When a cousin called her surprisingly confident for someone who had come from nothing, Ayana looked at her with real patience and said, "You'd be surprised how little loud people usually know about wealth." The cousin didn't speak to her again for the rest of the evening. When another family member suggested that Ayana had perhaps not fully understood what she was entering into, Ayana asked her to please finish the thought because she was genuinely interested in what understanding might look like from someone who hadn't left the family compound in 3 years. Minsuk, the second time he witnessed one of these exchanges, stopped trying to intervene and started simply watching with the expression of a man attending a performance he found unexpectedly enjoyable. "You don't need me to say anything, do you?" he said to her later, in the car on the way home. "I never needed that," she said. "I know," he said. "I just keep wanting to anyway." She looked at him. Then she laughed. It was the first time in a week she had laughed properly, and the sound of it changed the temperature of the car completely. He reached across and took her hand without looking away from the road, and they drove home in a silence that had nothing uncomfortable in it at all. The family's investigation into Ayana's background was supposed to produce something they could use. A gap in the story. An embarrassing history. Evidence of motive or dishonesty or both. What they found instead dismantled several of the things they had told themselves. Her father was Dr. Emeka Davies, not a name that registered immediately in Kang family circles, but a name that became very significant very quickly once someone ran it properly. One of the most respected cardiac surgeons on the continent. Published. Decorated. The kind of man who had been offered hospital department head positions in 3 countries and had turned 2 of them down because he found the work more important than the title. Her mother ran an international medical foundation with a focus on surgical access in under-resourced regions. The foundation had operating programs in 11 countries. It was the kind of work that received no glamorous press because glamorous press was not what it was built for. Ayana had grown up in a world of considerable privilege. Private schools. Travel. The kind of education that opened every door. And at 22, after her younger brother died of a condition that better surgical access in their city might have caught earlier, she had looked at everything available to her and chosen the hardest, most direct version of useful she could find. She had never told Minsuk's family any of this. Not because she was ashamed. Not because she was hiding it. Because it had nothing to do with who she was in that room, and she had never once believed it was something she owed them. The cousin found out first. She came to Ayana at a family gathering a week after the investigation concluded, and there was something different in her bearing, not warm exactly, but stripped of the performance. Just a woman standing in front of another woman who had been right all along and knowing it. "I didn't know," the cousin said. "I know you didn't," Ayana said. I'm not saying it would have made it acceptable." "Good," Ayana said. "Because it wouldn't have." The cousin nodded slowly. I'm sorry, Ayana. Actually sorry. For all of it. Ayana looked at her for a moment. Okay. The grandmother said nothing publicly. But the household staff noticed that she had stopped making comments. Jia found her in the garden on a Tuesday afternoon. She had the expression she got when she was carrying something she'd been carrying for too long, a brightness pushed slightly too high, the particular tension of someone preparing to say a difficult thing. She sat down beside Ayana on the stone bench near the rear wall where the flowering trees had just started to blossom, and she was quiet for a moment. I need to tell you something, Jia said. Okay, said Ayana. Jia looked down at her hands. When I was 19, I was in an accident. Overseas, I was doing a semester program in Edinburgh, and there was an accident during a day trip with my program group. It was bad. I needed emergency surgery. She paused. I needed blood. My blood type is rare. AB negative. Ayana was very still. The hospital didn't have enough supply. The situation was, they were telling my supervisors it was serious. And a nurse volunteered. Jia looked up at her. She had the same blood type. She stayed through the whole thing. The surgery went for hours. Afterward, she asked the hospital staff not to give her name to the family when they arrived. She said she didn't want to fuss. Jia's voice had gone slightly uneven. They respected her wishes. We never knew who it was. A long pause. I recognized your voice, Jia said quietly. 2 weeks after you married Minsuk, we were talking in the kitchen, and you were telling me about a case, and you used an expression, a specific way you have of saying something is manageable. I heard it, and I stopped breathing for a second. I didn't know how to, I didn't want to be wrong. So I waited. I talked to the hospital. Through official channels it took a long time, but eventually. She reached into her jacket pocket and set a folded document on the bench between them. The records confirmed it last week. Ayana looked at the document. She didn't pick it up. You saved my life, Jia said. And then you disappeared. And then you married my brother. Her voice broke on the last word, not into grief, but into something that was too full of different things to stay even. Did you know? When you met him, did you know who he was? No, Ayana said. I didn't know Minsuk existed. I didn't know your family name. I treated a lot of patients that year. She paused. I remember Edinburgh. I remember the surgery. I don't know if I would have recognized you. You were 19, and I only saw you briefly before you went under. Jia exhaled. How are you not more? How are you just sitting there like that? Ayana looked at her steadily. Because right now you need me to be steady. That's usually why I sit like this. Jia laughed, sudden and wet, and then she was crying properly, and Ayana put her arm around her and let her. The grandmother called Ayana to her private sitting room 3 days after the records were confirmed. She was sitting in the high-backed chair near the window where she did her reading in the mornings, but she was not reading. She was waiting. The room was very quiet. When Ayana entered and sat across from her, the grandmother looked at her for a long time without speaking, the way old people look at things they are trying to see properly, without the shortcuts they've built up over decades. I insulted you, the grandmother said finally. Ayana said nothing. She waited. I called you the help. I ordered the staff to remove you from the table. I allowed my family to treat you as though you were less than them. And before any of this, she stopped. Her jaw was tight. Before any of this, you gave blood in a hospital in Edinburgh so that my granddaughter could live. And then you asked them not to give your name. It wasn't an extraordinary thing, Ayana said. I had the blood type. She needed it. That's usually how I make decisions. It was an extraordinary thing, the grandmother said. You were a young nurse volunteering blood during a long emergency surgery for a stranger. That is not a small thing, and you will not minimize it in this room. Ayana looked at her. The grandmother's eyes were bright in the way eyes get bright when people are holding back something large. I owe you an apology, the grandmother said. A real one. Not a managed one. She paused. I was wrong about you. And the manner of it, calling you the help, assuming it was not only wrong. It was beneath this family. It was beneath me. You're asking for forgiveness because you now know who I am. If I had walked in here as nobody, would you still have humiliated me? Ayana said. The grandmother stayed silent. Then Ayana continued. I thought as much. I forgive you. Not because I've forgotten, but because I don't carry bitterness for things that say more about the other person than me. But never confuse status with worth again. That mistake is dangerous. The grandmother spoke. I should have known better. Yes, you should have. The grandmother closed her eyes briefly, accepting it without defense. You're right, she said again. I spent too many years believing certain things about people the moment I looked at them. I see now how ugly that was. Ayana was quiet for a moment before speaking again. I forgive you, she said finally. Not because you found out who my family is. And not because I've forgotten what happened. She held the grandmother's gaze. I forgive you because I don't want to carry bitterness for something that says more about you than it ever did about me. The grandmother looked at her then with something unfamiliar in her expression. Not authority. Respect. And I will never make that mistake again, she said softly. Ayana nodded once. Good. Because the next person you look down on might be someone who saved a life you love too. The grandmother nodded. Her spine straightened slightly, the old authority returning, but shaped differently now. Less like a wall. More like a foundation. My grandson, she said, has never looked at anyone the way he looks at you. I know, Ayana said. He was drowning, the grandmother said quietly. After his brother died. We could all see it, and none of us knew how to reach him. She looked at Ayana. You did. He reached himself, Ayana added. I just didn't get out of his way while he did it. The grandmother was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that might have been a laugh, very small, quickly contained. You are extremely difficult to manage. Yes, Ayana agreed pleasantly. The banquet was a formal affair, business partners, extended family, the kind of evening where the Kang family presented its consolidated power to the people it did business with, and the presentation was required to be flawless. Long tables. Catered food. The low hum of conversations that were simultaneously personal and strategic. The grandmother stood at the head of the gathering after dinner, the way she always did. She gave her usual remarks, the family's achievements, the year ahead, the gratitude for the relationships in the room. Her voice was steady and measured, and exactly what everyone expected. Then she paused. I want to speak about someone in this family, she said. Someone who came into this house not as she deserved to be received. Who faced insult and dismissal from people, including myself, who should have known better. Who responded to all of it with a composure and a dignity that most of the people in this room could not have matched. The room was paying attention now. Not politely. Actually. Years ago, when my granddaughter Gia was in a hospital in Edinburgh and we nearly lost her, a young nurse volunteered blood and stayed through a long and dangerous surgery and saved her life. That nurse asked for no acknowledgement. She gave no name. She simply did what was needed and then she left. The grandmother paused. That woman is my grandson's wife. And she is a member of this family. Not because she married into it. Because she earned her place in it long before she ever knew this family existed. The room was completely still. The grandmother picked up a small wooden box from the table beside her old, dark with age, the kind of object that had been in the same family for long enough to become symbolic of something larger than itself. She walked toward Ayana, who was seated near Minsuk with the expression of someone who had been trying very hard not to be moved and was losing that effort quietly. The grandmother placed the box on the table in front of Ayana. The Kang family heirloom, she said. Given to the women of this family who hold it together. Ayana opened the box slowly. Inside was a bracelet, simple, old, the kind of beautiful that doesn't need to announce itself. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked up at the grandmother. Thank you, she said. Her voice was steady. Her eyes were not quite. She lifted the bracelet and closed the box, and the room exhaled around her, and Minsuk beside her put his hand over hers on the table, and that was all. Later that night they stood on the balcony off the upper sitting room. The city spread below them in its particular nighttime version of itself, lights and distance, and the low continuous sound of a place that never entirely stops. Ayana had taken off her heels. Minsuk had loosened his tie. They had been standing in comfortable silence for several minutes in the way that people can only stand in silence when they know each other well enough that the silence isn't a gap. Do you regret any of it? He asked. She considered the question seriously, the way she considered most things, not performing consideration, but actually running it through. No, she said. Even the beginning? Walking into a room full of people who had already decided who you were. I've walked into rooms like that my whole life, she said. At least this one had good lighting. He laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that came from somewhere uncomplicated, and she turned to look at him when it happened because she always liked seeing it, the way his whole face opened when he laughed freely. The way he became for a moment just a man standing on a balcony finding something genuinely funny, nothing else. "The glass," he said, when the laugh had settled. "You really asked her if you should clean the glass." "I thought the moment called for it." "It absolutely called for it." She smiled and turned back to the city. He moved slightly closer. Not dramatically. Just the natural physics of two people who preferred the same gravitational space. "She's going to be difficult still," Iona said. "Your grandmother." "Not as bad. But she's not going to become easy." "I know," he said. "Good. I'm not looking for easy." He looked at her profile for a moment, the set of her jaw, the particular quality of stillness she had, the way she stood in the world as though she had always known it would eventually make room for her, and she was simply waiting with patience for it to catch up. "Neither am I," he said. Below them the city continued its quiet, relentless movement, indifferent to any of it, and up on the balcony Iona Davies stood with her shoes off and her husband beside her and the Kang family heirloom on her wrist. And she had not won anything because she had not been competing, and she had not survived anything because she had never been in danger of becoming less than she was. She had simply remained herself. In a room that asked her to be less, and then in a family that slowly learned what that cost them, and finally in a life that had quietly arranged itself, through Edinburgh rain and hospital corridors and a man who had nearly driven into a streetlight, into exactly what she deserved. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, at what point did you realize Iona was never the one losing in this room?